My name is Taylor Fennell,
And I'm Luke Scarrow.
and we read A Curious Mind by Brian Grazer and Charles Fishman. And going into it, this book was mostly about Brian Grazer and his life about curiosity. Brian Grazer is a large movie producer that has been in the business for several years. So he first started out as a graduate student, like graduating from USC and then going into law school at USC, but completely changed that path when he became like ever curious to allow him to then seek different opportunities. He never took no for an answer and then used his curiosity to take on opportunities he could at that moment. And then the most astonishing thing that we both saw in reading this book is how by simply just being curious about others, he has created some of the most iconic and successful movies of our time. It also led him to be able to see opportunity in circumstances and have led him to meet amazing people like Edward Teller, Fidel Castro, Oprah, Princess Diana, and his attribute to having curiosity, leading him to partnerships with director Ron Howard, and then to create the producing studio Imagine Entertainment. The hopes of this book presentation is show you like his meetings, his life, and then how to also be curious and how that can shape leadership style and then create opportunities.
The first quote from chapter 1 that we kind of wanted to cover was, "You're born curious, and no matter how much battering your curiosity has taken, it's standing by, ready to be awakened." And I guess the best way to talk about this and the way that he talked about it in the book is his divergence away from being a lawyer and a law student to being a movie producer. He was always listening, and the example that he uses in the book is he was overheard a conversation between two colleagues talking about how he was carrying legal documents to these big executives in Hollywood, and he made the call within the day to get that job. And so he used that opportunity, and by always being ready and always being curious and letting it kind of take over that kind of mentality, he used it to start being a courier for this company, and started meeting all of these executives by never taking no for an answer. And he would always say, "I'm going to hand this document over to that executive. I cannot hand it over to a secretary." And he would always be hand delivering these documents to them. And this was how he was able to use that curiosity and harness it to meet these big executives. And I think that's a really cool leadership style, or a leadership quality, is always be ready to be awakened by your curiosity and let it lead you.
Yeah, it was definitely like fun to see how he like started off like having such a small job to then becoming such a big producer, and then like rolling into chapter 2 is that he kind of talks more about like different leaders. So we have Sam Walton, who is the creator of Walmart, and he talks about how Sam would have his executives travel to different competitors like Kmart to see what they were doing and how Walmart could be better by looking at these different competitors and what Walmart could do better. He also uses curiosity to meet different people who have different personalities, and then using like his curious questions, he's able to understand other people and then gain a better sense of self. And then he has more of like an empathy toward these people, because without asking those questions, he wouldn't have been able to understand where they're coming from and how they grow and how they differ from him.
Yeah, I think it was a big chapter on admiration towards other people that used their curiosity to gain a better self understanding, and also to how to better their company. And I think that's a really good leadership quality. In chapter 3, he kind of talks about determination and using that empathy and using that curiosity to shed light on a kind of a special story. And he said it's probably one of the most moving things that he's done, is talking to a Chilean native who was imprisoned and tortured. Her name was Veronica de Negri. And he used that story that she told, and he talks about how that curiosity led him into really listening to her story and taking that story and putting it into a movie. And the movie's called Closet Land, and it's about how a woman and her torturer, and how she got out of it, and uses that imagery and puts it into a movie. And I think it serves a higher purpose. So using that curiosity to serve a higher purpose and to shed light on something. He also talks about in this chapter how he used his curious mind to overcome some of his childhood learning disabilities. He says that nowadays he probably would have been characterized or diagnosed with dyslexia, and his grandmother was a huge influence on him as a child, who he says his grandma really recognized the curious mind that he had, and led him to really fall into it, and really used that curious mind to overcome the adversities of that learning disability and not to compare himself to other classmates. And I guess in a leadership sense, I think it's really important to understand that we all have our challenges, and we all have a disability in some form or the other, but really leaning into who we are as a person and having that sense of self-worth and that self-understanding is going to be beneficial to our leadership style.
Yeah, and like leading into like how he would meet people and like understanding their type of background. He leading into chapter 4 is like what he talks about throughout the entire book is like not taking no for an answer. And like one of the quotes he has is like, if you give up with the first no, then your curiosity isn't serving you very well. And that's how he was able to create the movie How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Audrey Geisel, who's Dr. Seuss's late wife, she was really protective over his work, and everybody, including her, had like this perspective of what the movie was going to be. And so going into it, she was super protective, already had like a vision of what the movie was going to be. This was something that he needed to make beautifully. And when she watched the movie and the credits were rolling, she stood up and clapped, and that was like his confirmation that after all this time of receiving the word no, he finally got confirmation that she was yes, that she was okay with what he was producing, and it ended up being an amazing movie. And you know, people watch it every year, all year long. And then going into it is like how curiosity can control like your fear. He liked to meet a bunch of people, and like one of the people he met was Isaac Asimov, which is a science fiction writer. And he goes in and he's been waiting forever to meet this guy, and he just bombs the meeting. He was not prepared enough. He was so nervous to meet this guy that they ended up getting up and leaving. And then this really showed to him that like having preparedness, and it's like a really good leadership quality, is to always be prepared and like then turn around and learn from your mistakes. And like we always face mistakes, but learning from them and then going forward, that's always really important.
Yeah, the largest portion that I took from that is just using your curious mind to harness your fear and gain control of it. And that's what he uses as an example in the book is just always be willing to admit things that you don't know, and being willing to admit things that you don't know will lead you to be curious. And by that, you can be a better leader. Just being willing to admit that you don't know something, that can open up your mind to learning the answer. Rolling into chapter 5, a quote that stood out to both of us was, questions create both the authority in people to come with ideas and take actions, and the responsibility to move things forward. And curiosity isn't necessarily about achieving something, but about driving towards a goal. Sometimes it's just about connecting with people. And the biggest example that we saw in this chapter was showing respect and showing a genuine caring for people. And he uses kind of some examples about how we can reframe questions to gain a better understanding of somebody, or to use it to create interest or excitement back into a relationship. He talks about this in family and in maybe a significant other, maybe even with friends. Reframing questions from what happened at work, which can be easily brushed off with a nothing answer, to reframing a question to like, what did Sally think of your new idea at the product launch? That's one example that he used. And this requires people to give thought to their answer and to spark curiosity with one another rather than getting a nothing response. I think this is a principle that can be widely applied to any relationship, and especially in a leadership role. This will help you gain a better understanding of the people around you, as well as create an investment between one another. And I think that's something that a lot of leadership maybe sometimes lacks, is not really listening for the answer, but just asking the question as kind of like a need to do basis. Being able to reframe questions and actually being genuinely curious in the response can help create empathy and a better connection between the two of you.
Yeah, that was really important. And then kind of rolling into chapter 6, he talks about anti-curiosity and how like not going by the normal like Main Street vision of like the football team in the movie winning the big game or the guy getting the girl at the end of the movie. It really shows how it can be like different with like a story with soul and a characters with heart. And then how that also can be negative with like anti-curiosity is that like when Grazer presents a script to a person he wants on his team, he's not wanting them to have the anti-curiosity. He wants them to have the curiosity so that they can join his team and be part of the product he's trying to complete.
Yeah. Final point to the book is when you know more, you can do more. He talks about how being curious is a state of mind, and more specifically, it's the state of having an open mind. Curiosity is a kind of receptivity. Best of all, there's no trick to curiosity. You just have to ask one good question a day and listen to the answer. Curiosity is a more exciting way to live in the world. It is truly the secret to living a bigger life. And I don't know if I could surmise leadership in a better way. We think that always being open and always having a curious state of mind is a really good leadership quality. And just being receptive to everything and never taking no for an answer was the biggest lesson that I learned from this.
Yeah, and overall, we thought that Brian wrote the book to explain the importance of curiosity and how being curious transformed him from a young law student to a well-known and respected movie producer. And by being this curious self, he was able to think outside the box and like the normal realm of today's society. And it was important on being curious, and that led to his own achievements. We wouldn't have had these great movies like Apollo 13, 8 Mile, Friday Night Lights, and How the Grinch Stole Christmas without Brian Grazer being curious.